Okay, this is video lecture for week 3 of the Humanities 1 course. I'm just going to jump right into the questions here. The first question is, what role did Greek myths have in the development of ancient Greek society? Why was it so important? This is a really important question. Mythology is a huge thing in the ancient world, and we still have these myths with us today. If you've gone to see Wonder Woman, you're looking at, in some ways, a modern version of Greek mythology. And it's fascinating to us. It's something that we all know the name Hercules. Um, and the answer to the question is that mythology is a way a culture attains an identity in many ways. Um, if you asked an ancient Greek person, who are you? He would point to the myths. He would say, this is the kind of person that I am. I come from this. Um, this is a, a way a culture sets its standards. Mythology becomes a foundation for the culture, for behavior, for morals in many ways. The ways that the heroes behave in these myths uh, give the ancient Greeks and Romans standards of behavior and a sense of heroic identity. When Virgil wrote the Aeneid, that's what he was doing very consciously. He was giving Rome a foundational myth, um, uh, giving it a heroic background and linking it to ancient Troy. So mythology is the stories that a culture tells about itself. And we have those with us today. When I was a kid, we were told about the story about George Washington and the cherry tree. He chops down this cherry tree with a hatchet that he's got, and his father comes and says, "Who did this?" And George Washington says, "I cannot tell a lie. It was I, father." And that story is held up to us when I was a kid as a standard of honesty. And so we still do this to some degree, and but that was the purpose of mythology. Um, and this is related to our next question, which is why do scholars interpret the painting on page 102 as an older man propositioning a younger one instead of just the teacher-student scenario? And the reason we know this is not just a teacher-student relationship is that this is just a very tame one of these pictures. There are a lot of Greek uh, paintings on vases that are much more explicit in this older man, younger man kind of sexual relationship. We know this was a facet of Greek society and history. And uh, once again, it goes back, if you look at their mythology, there are various gods who have romantic relationships with young men in Greek mythology. And so this was just a facet of Greek civilization. And that painting that we have on the vase in your textbook is simply one of a type of painting that there are a lot of that show this kind of relationship. Um, Next question, what events influenced Sparta to have such a strict society? Um, Sparta, we kind of have this, we know about the Spartans still to this day. The movie The 300, and there was a sequel to it, I don't remember what it was called, but about these famous Spartan battles against the Persians. Um, the Spartans were the warriors of the ancient world. They were undefeated for a very, very, very long time. And their whole culture was based on making warriors. The way they raised their kids, the way they structured their society, everything was about doing battle. And it's just a fact of antiquity. When they finally lost a battle in 371, I think, BC against Thebes. It was an earth-shattering event. The Spartans had been beaten, and it changed the ancient world in many ways because they kind of lost their status as the undefeated heavyweight champions of ancient warfare. Um, One of my favorite stories about Sparta is when Greece was being invaded by Macedonians, I think, Um, the general of the Macedonian forces sent a threatening message to Sparta, and he said, if I win this war, I'm going to make all your people slaves. And the Spartan uh, commander sent back a one-word reply, if. So that's the kind of people that the Spartans were, and just how their culture was developed. It was their identity. Um, Next question was poetry the first form of literature? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, because um, it was first music. What we have with a lot of ancient literature are the words without the music. But all of this stuff was meant to be sung originally. And this goes all the way back into antiquity, um, into prehistory, because this is the way you hand down knowledge in a culture that doesn't have writing, is you do it through song. And so the elders know the songs of the culture and they sing those songs. And so the younger generation learns the songs and the songs are passed down. And we still have some of those with us. I mean, I have, when I was a kid out in the foothills of the Wichita Mountains, I remember hearing the powwows with the Kiowa and Comanche Indian folks that lived out there. And you could hear them and singing their songs. They still know some of these songs that have been passed down for who knows how long. So poetry is the oldest form of literature because music is the oldest form of communication, of something that you're going to be able to remember and pass on to someone else. Um, why did many of Aristotle's conclusions go unchallenged for centuries? I think the answer to that is the Dark Ages. You have about 1,000 years of just not a lot happening in European Western culture. The fall of Rome and Greece was a disaster of such enormous proportions. Knowledge was by and large lost. Um, we forgot as a civilization how to build things the way the Romans did. People in the Dark Ages could look back at the ruins of Rome and think, how did they do this? We will never, ever be able to do this again. Um, the more we learn about the, ancient Greek and Roman history, the more we realize how much was lost. A book was just found recently, and it's by a Greek mathematician, and I'm not sure which one, but essentially he had already figured out calculus. Um, and calculus doesn't show up again in human history for a very long time. All of our modern technology is based on calculus. Without calculus, you can't have things like computers. And that was lost. I mean, just lost because the books themselves were destroyed. Um, uh, who knows how the world would be different had that particular book not been lost. If you want to really freak yourself out, Google analog computer ancient Greece. And what will pop up is the Antikytherian mechanism, which is an analog computer. It is a computer that they found. Basically, it's a box with a bunch of gears and stuff in it, and it's more finely geared than a Switch watch. It's literally got hundreds of gears. And on one side, you can plug in a date, and on the other side, it will show the positions of the planets and the phases of the moon. It measures things we didn't think people back then knew how to measure. And so nothing like this. No machine like that shows up in history for another 1,600 years at least. And so a lot was lost. And so Aristotle's stuff just kind of, there it is. And there's nothing there to challenge it until the Renaissance and the Enlightenment happens. And that's why. I got a lot of questions about the sculptures, um, because you have these beautiful, nude human bodies depicted by Greek and Roman sculptors, and our own society is pretty much obsessed with our bodies, and a lot of people notice that the standard of beauty for men has not changed much from the ancient world. If you look at those ancient Greek statues of men, they're lean and they're cut and they've got six packs and they're, athletic, and that's kind of with us from then until now. But the statues of Greek women would not be considered ideal in today's world. Several students call them average. Now, meanwhile, these statues were famous for being beautiful. People came from all over the world to see these statues of these beautiful goddesses. Um, and so what you see is the fact that the standard of beauty for women seems to change dramatically and in a very short period of time throughout Western history. Um, it's fluctuated several times in the last 50 years in our own culture. People can't believe it when I say that Marilyn Monroe was a size 14, but she was. And that was a very different standard of beauty in the 50s and 60s than what we have now. Um, Now, I don't know why that is, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Why is it that the standard for men has remained unchanged? The standard for women has altered dramatically, um, again and again and again. But you do see that in these sculptures as we look at how we would define physical beauty now as opposed to then. Um, Last question, what are some things that are still practiced today in Greece that happened back in the ancient times? I've spent some time in Greece. I've spent some time in Athens. I was there for a competition a long time ago. And one of the things that was interesting to me was there were a whole lot of statues. There were places you could go, stores you could walk into and buy statues of the gods. Some of them were original, and many of them were reproductions of statues from the ancient world. But Greek people seem to really still like to have those statues of the gods around in their houses. And these weren't all just tourist attraction places. These were places that people just came to buy their statues. And I thought that was interesting that in this modern age and after all this time that these statues of the gods and goddesses are still very much a part of Greek culture. Um, and so that is that. Keep sending me questions for next week, and I will keep throwing these lectures up there. Once again, if you have any questions or need to get in touch with me, please do.